Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second day afternoon session of our Symposium on Conflict and Civility and Political Discourse, Where's the Line? My name is Pete Damiano. I direct the University Public Policy Center, and I'm on the faculty in the College of Dentistry. And this panel is the reason that we are here at this time of year. The question we thought was very important for a lot of different reasons, as we've been talking about. And the timing we thought to give attention was to try to put it as close to the Iowa caucuses as we could, but yet still hopefully be able to hold out from the weather. On Wednesday morning, that was a little questionable whether we timed this very well or not, but today is a beautiful day, and that worked out very well. And we feel very fortunate to have the group that we have with us today. I want to give a special thanks to Bill, how do you pronounce your last name? Keettel. Who works with the Johnson County Republican Party. He jumped in on hours' notice, literally, when Matt Strawn, the chair of the Republican Party, came down with strep and was not able to make it. So I want to give Bill a special thanks, and then I will allow Dean to make the introductions beyond that. But I will introduce our guest moderator, who is also well regarded and well known in his own right. And some of you saw Michael Goucher this morning. And Dean, from having grown up in Milwaukee, Dean is sort of Iowa's Michael Goucher, if you will. He is a radio and TV journalist and does all other kinds of things, but on top of that has covered the Iowa caucuses for many, many years. So with that, I will turn it over to Dean.
We're going to begin this afternoon with Caroline Tolbert, who is with the University of Iowa Department of Political Science. She's also an author and has co-authored a new book that's just been published by the University of Chicago Press. It's called Why Iowa? And if you will, those of you who are back here, just excuse my back. I'll try to turn back once in a while and acknowledge that you're there, but I'm sitting out here so that I can make eye contact with our panelists, and I've told them that this isn't going to be, although we will start off with a short presentation here by Caroline, but we're just going to have a coffee table type discussion here. And so that's the way. It won't be lecturing or presentations by any means, although we will start out with Caroline just giving a brief overview of the caucus system. And then we're going to just have a roundtable discussion here. You've already been introduced to Caroline Tolbert. I've talked about her already. Bill Keettel is chair, as you've heard, of the Johnson County Republican Party, and he's an Iowa City attorney. I just became acquainted with Bill anew here and learned that I knew his dad, who was head of the University of Iowa Hospitals and Clinics Department of OB-GYN for many years. And so I know that family name very well. And then Sue Dvorsky. I know Sue from having been on Iowa Press and over the years as a resident here in Coralville. Sue now is chair of the Iowa Democratic Party, as you know. So Caroline, let's hear from you.
Okay. It is an honor to be here, and I must tell you that when I learned about this discourse conference, I thought to myself that the caucuses is actually one of the places where we see rather civil discourse in presidential elections, and that is because negative campaigning, extensive negative campaigning, is somewhat taboo in the caucuses. Most campaigns are run in mass media ads, run on television ads, radio campaigns, newspaper ads, and the caucuses are really unique in politics because retail politics or face-to-face politics is very important. Meeting candidates, higher political knowledge, and quite a bit of civic engagement in selecting candidates. So my co-authors and I have this book, Why Iowa, that was just published, and of course, as I tell my students, and I'm lucky to have one of them here in the back room, that everybody asks, well, why not Colorado? Why not Michigan? Why not my state? And as presidents have become more important in American politics over time, this this act of picking presidents becomes more important. And by the time we get to the general election, our choice is usually down to 2, with potentially a third-party candidate that will not win. So the most important decision, in some ways, in picking presidents is right here in the presidential nomination process. One of the things that has long been convention in studies of the presidential nomination process is that the winner of Iowa rarely becomes president. There are some exceptions. But the old saying, or the conventional wisdom, is New Hampshire picks presidents, Iowa picks corn. Or maybe it's the other way, Iowa picks corn and New Hampshire picks presidents. And if you look at the winners before 2000, the winner of the Iowa caucus in many cases did not go on to become the president. And what we argue in this book is that since 2000, there has been a punctuated change, change where winning Iowa has become more important in selecting, or not winning Iowa, doing better than media expectations is actually what it is, has become more important in selecting candidates for both parties, in large part because of the shift to new media and the viral effect of coverage of candidates coming out of Iowa. You know we don't have very many delegates to give away. You know we don't even give away those delegates until June because of our caucus system that takes the entire year. The candidates are not coming here for our delegates. The candidates are coming here because we are the first water test of how salient their campaigns are. And we argue in this book that Iowa is becoming increasingly important. And in this way, I can tell you, what our data shows is that the change in media coverage candidates receive before and after the Iowa caucuses is a primary predictor of how well candidates do in New Hampshire and then go on in terms of winning primaries nationwide. And let me give you an example. Do you guys know why Iowa goes first? Do you know how that happened? It wasn't actually, they didn't act, in 1972, when Iowa chose to move its date for the caucuses way up, it wasn't to become first and become the media focus and help pick candidates so primarily. It was because we have this caucus system where you have to have 30 days between each of the caucuses. And so in order to get in all of these, the district and the precinct and the county, they had to move it all the way back. And
that is the caucuses first and then the county convention.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in 1972, it didn't really matter, actually. And in 1976, along came a no-name, Jimmy Carter. He had no money, he had no name recognition, and he had no standing in the polls. And he decided, I'm going to put all my chips into this little state Iowa, because it's little. Because I can campaign here without a large war chest.
And he came in as an unknown Georgia governor, and I've said for a long time that the program at that time on Iowa Public Television, Iowa Press, was not statewide at that time yet, because Iowa Public Television wasn't a statewide network yet, but that Jimmy Carter came in, we put him on the air, and pretty much introduced him to Iowa, and in a little bit, you might say, gave him a springboard, at least in Iowa, that launched him into the White House.
And what Dean is saying here is very important, because this book is saying that Iowa is so important, and Iowa is becoming more important because of media attention to Iowa. It's not winning Iowa, it's doing better than expected. It turns out Jimmy Carter in 1976 came in second to undecided. But because he was coming from nowhere to second, he was considered the media darling. And in 2008, by all intentions, Hillary Clinton had been selected the winner of the nomination, and in that June or July, she had the most name recognition, the most money, the most media coverage, and by losing slightly to Obama in the caucuses, she failed to exceed media expectations. And Obama, again the underdog, using Iowa in a similar way as Carter, exceeded media expectations. And so it's this game Iowa is so important because of the media and because of what the expectations are, and we can think about this in 212. Romney, we again are talking about Romney, but poor Romney in Iowa had a hard time in 2008. He had the name recognition, the most money, the most media coverage in July. He spent more than any other Republican candidate in Iowa, and then a no-name, Huckabee, beat him in the Iowa caucuses, which fatally wounded him going into the New Hampshire primary, and basically he was gone. So I can show you very quickly a couple slides. This is from October of October 31, 2008. So the caucuses were in January, so you know how much later. And Obama is saying here at a campaign speech in Des Moines on the day of the Iowa caucuses, "My faith in the American people was vindicated. What you started here in Iowa has swept across the nation. So the people of Iowa, I will always be grateful to you all." And this is sincere. He knows that he would not be in the White House if it wasn't for Iowa in 2008. Here's the little story. I told you, the counterfactual. Imagine 208 without the Iowa caucuses. Just start with the New Hampshire primary. Erase us. Likely, we would have had Clinton as the Democratic nominee and Mitt Romney as the Republican nominee. So this sequential process that starts with Iowa and has a caucus, not a primary. These are all rules. We don't have to let Iowa go first. Iowa doesn't have to have a caucus. It could have a primary. We could all have a national primary. Is fundamental in the choices of the candidates we get. And as I talk regularly, economic policy, foreign policy, tax policy, health policy, and you name it, for the things that our presidents do and how important it is for this country. So here, in exceeding initial expectations, the momentum from Iowa may have helped Obama, similar to Carter. 30 years later, the same path. And today, the Republican candidates are again looking at Iowa in 212, and I think a really important part of this discussion, I hope, will be on the 212 candidates and what we know and what that means that we might predict. And here's a similar way that an election rule matters. Everybody knows in 2000 that if we didn't have the Electoral College, that Gore would have been the president and not George W. Bush. It was one rule, one system, that changed a very historic outcome. In a similar way, without Iowa, Obama likely would not have been elected in 2008. So the rules matter. Iowa caucus, sequential rules. Should we change the rules? There's always debate every 4 years about changing the rules. It's very interesting, very quiet about keeping Iowa and New Hampshire first. No discussion this year, really, relatively speaking. I used to direct the Hawkeye poll. Fred Bemke, who's my colleague in political science, is now the director. It's a wonderful platform, and we collect survey data like the Des Moines Register of likely caucus goers every 4 years, and we have new information. 208 was very unique, wide open caucuses. The Des Moines Register recorded more than 2,100 candidate visits. We have on both sides, on the day of the caucuses, 43,000 stories in Google News. To give you an example, today, Penn State, if you Google Penn State with both the president and their head coach retiring, 12,000 stories. So you can see what an incredible, explosive media story this is on the day of the caucuses. And voters highly engaged on both sides. Turnout of the voter age population is usually 6% in the Iowa caucuses. In 208, it was 12%. And this I just think is interesting. This is from our surveys, and this shows you, we asked each one of our respondents, did you get a live phone call from Obama, from Edwards, from Clinton, from Richardson, from Biden, from Dodd? Did someone knock on your door? Did someone send you an email? Did someone call you? And you can see that Obama leads the Democratic candidates in basically all of these forms of contacting. He came into the caucuses with a very powerful grassroots campaign and network that was from his community organizing in Chicago, very effective in Iowa. Clinton didn't have that kind of background and network. And Romney, this is the Republican version of this, Romney used his money primarily in 208 for mass media campaigns and not the retail politics. 212 is very different because none of the candidates are visiting Iowa very much. However, that 43,000 stories will still hit on caucus day, and so whether they're here or not, what we do will make a big difference. So I think maybe.
Well, let me ask,
Yeah,
Sue,
I think that's
hold on just a second. You've raised so many points there, but I want to ask Sue, will what happens on January 3rd really make a difference this year, Sue? I know the main caucus is not in your party this year, but what do you think?
You know, I think, first of all, let me thank the Forkenbrock Institute. Let me thank Pete Damiano. This is a really interesting discussion and a great time to have it. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Bill. You know, when Matt called last night and said, I'm too sick to come, in the spirit of civility, I accused him of just being a giant chicken who couldn't take it. But he apparently is really sick. But Bill Keettel is also not just a long time and quite beloved Iowa City family. He's a high school classmate of my husband, so I'm glad we're not sitting bride and groom side, because Bob might actually be sitting over there just to give Bill the boost. So thank you for stepping in. You know, this year is going to be a remarkable, it's going to be remarkable to see what happens after this year. We are going to be caucusing on the Democratic side in every precinct. We are going to be doing it because, as Caroline talked about, the beginning, the sort of the genesis of the media attention on the one part of the caucus that is the presidential preference and delegate selection. The actual bulk of the caucus is an organizational night for both parties. In fact, the way that we pick delegates and presidential preference is so different and so, I would say, sort of generally stereotypical of the difference between the two parties, that the rest of it, the media attention, the national media attention, maybe Chuck Todd cares about it, because Chuck Todd does love him some Iowa, he really understands this. I don't know that anybody else cares about the expansion and retention of the Senate majority, say, from our point of view. But it's going to start there.
Why is that?
Because the organization that's required for us to succeed in 2012 will start that night. And I'll say, just as a disclaimer first, just so I don't have to keep saying it, and remind you that, of course, I am speaking here as the chief partisan. So, you know, take anything I say. When I say we, I mean, you know, my team, as it were. So the pathway for Christy Vilsack to beat Steve King starts at the caucuses in those 39 counties. Because
you are selecting delegates that night to the county convention, or why is it? I mean, it's a activist caucus. Why does the start of her defeating Steve King in that 4th district, why does that start that night? You're singing to the choir that night.
But that's the night that we get people in the door and signed up. That's the first place we start with that list. That's the place where we start that neighbor to neighbor, the thing that Obama used so effectively.
You mean you get independents there as well as Democrats? No. No,
but what we get is that activist base beginning to be getting to be really energized. You know, when they write the history of 8 with a little more distance, so that it's actually, you know, it's not people sucking up and, you know, it's actually history. Pluff and Axelrod came in with this incredible idea that looks now like it was, you know, it was the idea that blew out, you know, was going to just be, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do this grassroots thing. Well, the reason that worked, and I think Pluff and Axelrod are 2 of the smartest guys in the world, but this was not a new idea. All they did was piggyback on how the Democratic caucuses work, which is to say, it is groups of neighbors getting together in the school gym, talking civilly about civic issues. One person gets her 5, those 5 get their 5. It's a giant pyramid scheme. That's how you organize. So when they came in with this idea, this was not new, and it fit perfectly, like a hand in a glove with the way we do things in Iowa.
Did I note that you had something to say there, or?
Oh, I would just say that our book is actually based on extensive survey data. So while the media may have said, you know, Obama won because of his grassroots organizing, Obama won because of his experience in Chicago, our data actually shows how many everything in this book is based on a lot of empirical data. So it's not a history book, but it's also not an opinion book. So it's you understand?
Absolutely. No, you're doing an analysis, but I'm talking about the broader narrative.
Right, the broader narrative of how
the conventional wisdom that kind of took hold.
Bill, pull the mic over to you so that you can get word in here edgewise on the Republican side. Now, she has described, not in detail yet, but I hope we can go back and say how her caucus differs from yours. But it does in that you are just really taking a straw poll that night, aren't you? And not picking delegates?
We have the party organization function as well. It's done a lot differently, and I'm looking forward to hearing a plain statement of how the Democrats do it.
I can
because
tell you.
I'm slightly confused. Frankly, I'm a little confused, and I don't mean that in a catty way. I just mean since I don't go to their caucuses, I haven't lived with it and seen it firsthand.
If you think you're confused from the outside, you'd be so confused in it that, honest to God.
I can tell. Yeah.
Go ahead, Carolyn.
Okay, because this is what we do. We have to convey this to our students so I can convey it to you. So primary differences between the Republicans and Democrats. The Democrats have a public vote. They don't have a secret ballot. You vote by actually standing or raising your hand. The Republicans have a private ballot. The Republicans have one ballot. You cast one ballot. The Democrats, you use a form of proportional representation with a threshold. Believe it or not, it's what they do in a lot of European countries.
They call it being viable.
They call it being viable, but what it means is that everybody votes for their first candidate, and they go to the different parts of the room. But if a candidate, like Kucinich, does not have at least 15% of the people who are in that gym that night, then there is what's called a realignment process, but all it is a second vote where all the Kucinich people get to go and move over to some candidate that is viable, which was Edwards, Clinton, and Obama on that night. So,
and don't the Clinton people come and try to persuade the Kucinich people to come over to us?
Right there, you're standing, and there's 2 rounds of voting, and there's a threshold, and there's a period of just like kind of debating and discussing. So, and until this year, the Democrats used a proportional representation system to allocate the delegates nationwide, and the Republicans used winner take all. But this year, I hear the Republican Party is allocating the delegates proportionally nationwide.
And Sue, you call that being civil when Kucinich's delegates or supporters are standing over here, and Obama's or Clinton's come over and try to raid them? That's civility?
Actually, I think what it is, it almost always is incredibly civil. It is almost always incredibly, at the same time, heated and passionate. I don't think that there is a real difference, I think, and I think we need to be careful with it, because I think this conversation about political civility can get to be really used as either a weapon or it can get to be used as an excuse. It is almost always civil. That night, Coralville won the Mother Precinct. It's 240 people in the gym in Coralville's elementary school, which was at one point its junior high. Bob was the precinct chair. He was an Obama supporter. Hillary Clinton's supporters were not viable the first go-around in Coralville won on that night. Now, I couldn't believe that that was true, because the other thing that happens is you're very isolated. You know, now there's Twitter and everything, but really 4 years ago, people weren't Twittering. So you had cell phones, but you didn't really know what was going on. And I thought to myself, oh, good Lord, this can't be true. And if this happens here, Bob, we will be accused of having, this won't be good. So I'm out in the girls' bathroom, the boys' bathroom, up on both levels. I'm hollering, anybody out here? I asked personally 2 friends from Edwards to get out of their group and go to Hillary Clinton's group to make them viable so we could have the conversation. It can be extremely passionate, but it is almost always civil. And I think the reason is that the closer you are, if Matt were sitting here, what Matt and I would be able to talk about in a different level than Bill and I can talk about is the work that we do together as state party chairs. Now, I know that Matt Strawn has 3 kids under the age of 6. I know that his middle daughter broke her arm when he was last off at the RNC fighting for the calendar. I suggested to him that his his wife would be well within her rights to do some kind of physical harm to him when he got home with the baby's cast. I don't suggest violence. I was just saying, I lived through many years by myself with young children for, you know, a man who was out doing the public's work. So I said, I just think you should be careful of Aaron, is all I said. He did his JD work here at Iowa. Now, I don't know if he were a Cyclone, if I could, you know, muster up that kind of thing. But knowing all that about each other, he knows that we've got 2 kids, one at UNI, one here. Knowing all that about each other, Bill and Bob having a relationship, that makes it very difficult. Part of it's Iowa nice, part of it's maybe a generational thing, but that makes it very difficult for me to snipe at Matt on political issues, because I know him. You know, we sit in the makeup room thing at Iowa Press, and then we got to go back out into the press gaggle together. And I think that that's one of the things about the civility in the caucuses. It can be very passionate. It can be yelling. There are people, and I look around this room and see longtime Democratic caucus goers in Johnson County. And you know that there are people. Bob and I got married in '88, and I still identify myself as a Simon girl, and he still talks about Bruce Babbitt with a certain glowing thing. So it is not the case that these things happen easily, but I do think they happen civilly.
If you want to know just a little fun fact, we were obviously in the field, and we were interviewing likely caucus goers from across the state, up to the caucus and post the caucus. Thanks to Kevin Light over there, by the way, who gave us the Survey Research Center to do so. And we asked a question: why do you caucus? And is it just because you care about an issue, to support your party, because it's is your civic duty, or is it fun? And surprisingly, more than 50% of our respondents said caucusing was fun. Now, you could not convince your average primary voter in Florida, Michigan, or California to believe that the duty to participate in politics would be fun, but caucuses are fun.
Bill, and we'll continue the discussion, and if you've got other points, the rest of you jump right in. But I want to get you into the conversation here, because from what we've heard, and I've been at caucuses and I've covered them, so I know the system, but they're changing a little bit, and I want to talk a little bit about the social media that you mentioned and how that might be changing the nature of the caucuses. But there's another wrinkle this year, and that is a group called Anonymity, another called Occupy Wall Street or Des Moines or Iowa City or whatever it is, who think that maybe they can come and infiltrate and disrupt the caucus system. It seems to me, the way you've described it and the research you've done, that that is fertile ground for being able to come in and disrupt. Maybe not stand up and yell and shout, but be a part of the system, because if you register as a Republican ahead of time, you would be welcome at that caucus.
You can register on caucus day. There we have you don't need to be registered.
Well, let me comment a little bit about the change, the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Iowa group. What Mr. Borg is referring to is Father Cordaro and I think maybe David Goodner and some people from Des Moines have suggested that they would like to disrupt the Republican caucus process. And the start point for disruption is to interfere with the campaign headquarters of the candidates in Des Moines. So far, I have only heard of this being generated from Des Moines, but I don't want to, you know, encourage people to do this in Iowa City. The general rule is if you register as a Republican on the night, you can participate fully in the Republican caucus as if you'd been with the party since Dewey.
But is it but don't you have to live in the precinct?
Yes.
See, so
you're required to live in the precinct.
Yeah.
But remember that we have some pretty loose rules about who lives where. College Green Park in Iowa City is located in Iowa City 20. So we'll take a look at Iowa City 20 and see if we have folks coming in to the caucus who give us their address shall we say, the 400 block of College Street, even numbered. Then we'll have a lot of opportunity for people to, I don't want to discuss the strategies that a truly disruptive person might use, but we'll have some things in place that might not
I called it
their
fertile.
liking.
I called it fertile ground. So what you're really confirming is that, yeah, the process is fertile ground.
Well, any process can be misused. An election can be misused. Look at those folks in Philadelphia who lined up to prevent little old ladies from voting in their precinct. They said, "We're not going to let you vote today, ma'am." And they confronted voters. And when the Justice Department was asked to look into this, they declined. I think if that had happened in the South and the people had been wearing sheets, it would have been a major lawsuit, and the Southern Poverty Law Center would have been in it and everything. So there, even an election process is fertile ground if you're determined enough to interfere with your neighbor's rights.
Caroline, do you think, and I'll get to you in a minute, Sue, you think that this might give Republican candidates pause about how that caucus night is going to go because they've got so much writing on that night?
I feel like Anonymous particularly has been most effective using media, the internet, breaking into accounts, publicizing secret documents. That's really, you know, they brought down some CEOs. I'm not you know, which, Robert, is it Gary? Was it the Gary scandal? Do you know what I'm talking? No, you don't know. Hey, that Anonymous broke into his email account. He worked for the federal government and did some.
What you're saying is they're sophisticated and they know how to do things.
Technology-wise,
Yeah.
but in terms of enough bodies in enough caucuses where there are actual straw polls that, you know, are allocated to different candidates, I don't see it.
Sue?
But maybe I'll be wrong.
Well, you know, and I don't want to give this more attention than it needs to have, partly because I'd like to not give it attention at all. The Republican Party of Iowa and the Iowa Democratic Party, there is no daylight between us when we work on calendar issues with the RNC and the DNC. And I will tell you that from the state party perspective, there is no daylight between us when we talk about the security of the caucus system that people in Iowa on both sides, on both parties, have fought for a very long time. So this is one point, and really maybe the only point in all of 2011 and 2012 on which I agree with the governor, but the governor, Matt, and their people up at the state party level that, you know, set up the caucuses, and we are all in agreement that, that the caucus process is at its heart small d democracy with neighbors talking civilly with each other about civic issues. It will not be disrupted. There will be, and I think that the thing that that the Republican side is, I'm sure, spending a great deal of attention on, but so would we, is how their numbers get reported, because that will matter on that night a lot, and I am absolutely confident that people much smarter than I am are going to guarantee the security and safety of those numbers.
Let me comment on that. First of all, I want to agree and completely with what Sue said, because I watch Iowa Press, okay? I have had a chance to see Sue and Matt Strawn on Iowa Press talking about the calendar issue. When Florida tried to jump ahead in the process, and so to say that that there was no question Iowa was going to be first, there was a period of time when a few other states, Florida, Nevada, and South Carolina, were jockeying for first or second position. And that has been resolved really by the joint action of the two-party chiefs at the state level in Iowa, who just planted a flag in the ground and said, we're going to go on January 3rd, and if New Hampshire wants to jump back before Christmas, they're certainly welcome to do that, but they won't do that. it gets a little complicated. It's like musical chairs and nobody wants to be the last one with a seat. It's about that elementary school really at the top level.
But hasn't the jealousy over Iowa and New Hampshire being lead off in the nation, yes, it has played havoc with the scheduling, but it seems also that there is an insidious, I don't want to say plot, but at least it seems to be successful this year in taking the spotlight off the Iowa campaign. Yes, you know, in 2008, we had both Democrats and Republicans in this state with no incumbent or not even a likely successor to the vice president, successor to the presidency. So we had wide open campaigning and intense campaigning. It seems to be a lot less this time, and it seems that the debates that are just nonstop. There was one last night, and there's another one, I think, this weekend on Sunday, I believe, but it's just been nonstop. It seems to me the candidates don't have time hardly to be in Iowa because they're preparing, and that takes a lot of time because of the high-stakes national debates that are being held in other states.
And it's, oh, I'm sorry, Carol.
No, I would just say that I don't think it's because of the parties or jealousy from other states. I think the media follows the candidates, and the Republican candidates haven't been in Iowa very much. And part of that might be because Romney really spent a lot of time and a lot of money in this state. And 2008 wasn't very fun. And he's the front runner right now, and the other candidates are following Romney. And so how much is that why they're here or not here?
Well, and they're not in the four, you know, Nevada and South Carolina were put in by both parties, I think, to address the very real issues of demographics in New Hampshire and Iowa that, you know, rural issues, racial demographics. And so Nevada and South Carolina were put in there, and the RNC and the DNC really working off of a model developed by the IDP and the RPI with more cooperation at the national level than they've ever shown. We've done this for 40 years. That calendar was set with more cooperation than ever. They're not in any of the four states. I can tell you that. It is not the case that you asked about this, or Glover did, or somebody asked Matt about this. Where are they? Yeah. And, you know, bless his heart, he had a thing. But I felt bad for him because they're not here. So whatever they say, you can look at a map. The register's got this great thing, you know, where you pinpoint where they are. It's like blank. That's right. But they're not in New Hampshire either. They're not in Nevada, and they're not in South Carolina. The candidates have apparently this time pretty much, you know, bypassed the early state strategy with this series of debates that, you know, Romney was here like 2 days ago.
Yes.
And Governor Romney was here a couple of days ago, and he was talking about, you know, you can get to know me by what I'm saying. And I thought at the time, that's an odd construction, because really the beauty of this system when it worked was that they got to know us, that we were, you know, they weren't talking at us. There was some opportunity for listening as well. And that was why you made this pitch on early states, where you didn't have to spend $1 gazillion on media, that you could get to people. You could talk to real people, real nurses, real teachers, real farmers, real, you know, workers, families. And this having the debates like this succession of, by now, the same players saying the same things, and Newt does his shtick about, you know, the moderators are the problem, and they all have their thing, has completely obviated the need for them to campaign anywhere.
I can't agree. Naturally, Sue is seeing fewer of the presidential candidates this year because President Obama is expected to be renominated. We're seeing all of them. Bob Vanderplatz created an organization called the Family Leader and had a program starting in January of bringing every presidential candidate who would agree into Iowa City, either Pella or Ankeny or Ames and Sioux Center. In other words, 3 stops across the state with all the media markets covered. And the ones here in Iowa City were at the Union, and he has had Newt, Santorum, Bachmann, Paul, Pawlenty when he was in. I don't think Huntsman and Romney,
No.
not Romney.
No.
But he's had most of them. And it's been very informative to meet them. And they've all come in with other things. Santorum has made a point of visiting all 99 Iowa counties, claiming he's done a Grassley. Well, we'll see if he does it every year like Grassley does.
Well, he can't break, but Bill, he's done 99 counties. He's done the thing that we say you're supposed to do. Bless his heart, Rick Santorum can't break, what is it, 2, 3? He can't break, it's not working.
And Bachmann, of all the candidates, had the most candidate visits in Iowa.
And his,
Ron Paul next, I think.
Yeah.
But if you look at the leaders, well, Herman Cain and Romney are leading in the Iowa Hawkeye polls and in the Des Moines Register polls. Relatively speaking, very few visits compared to that number of 2,100, even if you divide it in half, so it's only 1,000, which would be for only one party having a nominating event. And I think what's kind of interesting about this debate strategy, the multiple debates, that would be what we would have if we had a national primary. Think about it. A national primary, everybody votes on one day, then you're going to have television, radio, and mass media coverage of the candidates in a forum that everybody can hear.
But we're moving toward it, aren't we?
Well, I'm not sure.
Some people are not ready to run for president. There is in this country, if you study the political history of this country, there is a very strong, well, let me go back a little bit. In Rome, they had something called, I mean, talking ancient Rome, the Republic. They had something called the cursus honorum. You had to move through the chairs, every bit as rigorous as if you were a Rotarian or a Shriner. And you had to do various jobs in the right order. Well, we in the United States have the same rule. The only person to get to be president from the House of Representatives was James Garfield, who had been a Civil War general and was a dark horse, and at a convention. And there are very few nominees who have gotten to the nomination from the House of Representatives, William Jennings Bryan being the most recent in 1896. And they are usually ideological candidates, and that the fact that they're ideological candidates hampers them in their appeal to the general electorate. So with the exception of Newt Gingrich, who has served as Speaker of the House, which is the equivalent of a national office, to get to be a viable candidate for president, you have to be a senator, a governor, a cabinet member, or a war hero. And there are almost no exceptions to that rule. So some of these people, I think that this is the Doris Kearns Goodwin election, because all these people have read Team of Rivals. Just like some of these other elections were based on Theodore White making of the president. All these people realize that if you stay in the race long enough and you appeal to the front runner and you bring something to the table, you can use that to negotiate a cabinet position or maybe a Senate run or something else. And that's why a lot of these people are in this race.
Carolyn, gender equality and the caucus system. The effect on women.
And I was just thinking as you were speaking about how Herman Cain was, we're not sure right now what's going on, leading in all of the polls with no experience in terms of holding these offices. But I would say on women candidates, it's not my area. I'm sure this next panel, Tracy Osborne's my colleague, really is an expert in this area, but politics in general is a difficult game for women candidates, and this means representative government as well. And so I think it would take a very careful analysis of all venues in terms of women's candidates.
You know, before we start, any other comments on the caucus system before we go to questions from the audience? Go
I
ahead.
do have one more comment. On 2008, for your benefit, if you haven't seen the book Game Change,
Yeah.
that is the book on the 2008 election so far.
The general.
And on the primary and the nomination process as well. You can see the infighting in the Clinton campaign. You can see Obama's grand strategy and mini strategies. But the great takeaway from the book is that Hillary Clinton made a strategic mistake early on, given the nominating rules of the Democratic Party, which are not winner-take-all, but proportional representation. That is, she did not play, except in Iowa, in the caucus states, in the small states. She conceded those to President Obama, and therefore had a huge deficit to make up. And the second thing that happened is that when Chris Dodd dropped out of the race, President Obama was adopted by the Kennedys as a sort of honorary Kennedy. And they used their power within the Democratic Party to turn a great number of the so-called superdelegates, which Hillary Clinton had counted on. And that is the story of the '08 election on the Democrat side. I'll share something with you that I haven't talked about publicly, but I believe it. You talk about Romney spending a lot of time in Iowa and then dropping out. I mean, and then, pardon me, not dropping out, but then finishing second to Huckabee. But if you look at the pattern, you know in Iowa, you certainly know, Dean, and you know, that there is a strong social conservative element within the Iowa Republican Party. And while Sam Brownback of Kansas was in the race, that social element was divided between two candidates. When Brownback dropped out, it was Huckabee all the way with that faction of the Republican Party, and Romney lost in Iowa, thereby clearing the way for McCain to win New Hampshire by appealing to the old Federalist element within the Republican Party, which is particularly strong in northern New England and upstate New York. Now, if you understand that, you have to ask yourself, did Brownback intend that result when he dropped out? He did support McCain after he dropped out. And I think there is every possibility that Romney didn't so much lose the Iowa caucuses in 2008 as he was outmaneuvered by that combination, thereby permitting McCain to revive and go on and get the nomination. That's just my view.
Interesting that you would bring up the strength of the conservatives within the Iowa Republican Party. I had a conversation just before we came and began here with Larry, who's down here in the second table, and I'd like to have him speak, if you will, Larry. He's from Madrid, which is just northwest of Des Moines. Still in Polk County he lives, though, and he caucuses there. But I'd like to have him say how he is moving within the Republican Party now. Well, I'm not going to take your thunder. Go ahead, Larry. And how are you going to caucus? Stand up, if you will, so people can hear you.
Take a mic if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure I'm comfortable in this position, but
and deal, if you will, with civility.
All right. Well, I've been a Republican for a long time until last January. I went to the courthouse in January and changed my registration to no party. A couple of months later, joined one of the organizations that's a sponsor of this event, which is No Labels. My first opportunity to vote in a presidential campaign was when Barry Goldwater ran, when you had to be 21 in order to vote. And I bought the general Republican principles of self-reliance and personal responsibility and all of those kinds of things, which I still believe today. But that's been left in the past to the ideologues, the people who aren't interested in additional information that would shake up their package of prejudices in either party. When you see that kind of gridlock in Washington, D.C., where decisions for the country's good can't be made, how can any of those people look in the mirror and say, I'm a patriot? They didn't put their country's needs first. And that's what leaves me behind in the dust, saying a pox on both of your houses, and well, I'm really discouraged.
Are you discouraged about civility within the Republican Party?
I am. That's part of what gets to me. But this isn't unique to Republicans. It has made me ashamed to be a Republican because of how my party has acted, the representatives of them.
Acted in what way?
As I say, I think they're simply trying to back up their own prejudices. When you listen to the people debate, generally speaking, not all of them, they haven't a clue about how the economy works. They don't care that they don't know. And that's the scary part. Now, that's not just true of them. If we had a row of Democrats, you'd have the same kind of thing. But the civility of it, they shoot at one another, they don't get to the issues. It just never comes up.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Bill, it's your party.
The distinct difference between the American system and most European systems is where coalitions are formed. In Europe, they form the coalition after the election. People get elected, and in many cases they have proportional representation systems. Israel has the same problem. Splinter parties get little shares of the vote, and the coalition is worked out by negotiation after people are elected. In Iowa and in the nation, the process of coalition formation begins right now. And January 3rd is a signal event in the process of coalition formation. The parties do it differently. The Republican Party sends a signal through the straw poll and then elects delegates to the county convention and precinct committeemen to govern the county parties. The Democrats have the system of proportional representation and viability groups and delegate equivalents, but it's the same purpose. It's to create a coalition of interests and ethnic groups and idea groups within the party to hopefully go on and govern in the state and nation. So if you have no party group that appeals to you, my suggestion is, quite frankly, start a third party in your county and get people who agree with you and form a coalition with them and run a candidate in a local election, particularly at the city level where the party label isn't determinative. And I'll close at that point with one comment from one of my favorite Iowa political scientists, Donald Call, who the Register has brought back. He said many years ago that the difference between the Republican conventions and the Democrat conventions was that the Republicans thought they had a divided convention if everybody didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. The Democrats thought they had a united convention if nobody started a third party.
And Bill, but I'm sorry.
No,
I didn't see
no,
you.
you go ahead.
I didn't see
you
her.
have just a quick comment.
But I am going to respectfully say this. I think that you came up here was very brave. I don't know how he made you do that, so thank you. But I'm going to suggest that you didn't speak to this. I just, I never try to pin Matt down on the national stuff because he's neutral, he can't be, and I don't want to put him in a spot. But it is the case with Maggie Tinsman sitting there, an absolute heroine of mine from the time I was very young. The Republican Party, I think we're afraid to say this as Democrats because then we don't want to look like we're all like pointing fingers. We got plenty of stuff on our side. Trust me, I know more about it now than I used to. But I will say that the Republican Party, as a national matter and as a state matter, you mentioned Bob Vander Plaats. I believe that Bob Vander Plaats has been one of the most dangerous Iowans to rise in the last 15 years in this state. I believe that it has been bad for the Republican Party. I believe that it's been bad for civic discourse and civil discourse. And I actually, as a citizen, taking off the whole hat thing, party chairs come and go, and I'll come home when I'm done with this gig and, go back to finding an honest job. But the level of discourse that has happened on that side, I find to be heartbreaking.
You guys, is it discourse? Is the problem discourse? I don't see the problem as discourse. Honestly, I don't. I think that's a Band-Aid. Your comments actually are the truth. I feel like both of our parties have not been able to respond to the basic policy needs of the country: jobs, the economy, the debt, wars, so many of the problems. And I feel like that they're increasing nonpartisan and disaffiliated Americans, and that I feel like both parties are going to need to find a way to reinvent themselves for the 21st century, and to be maybe not just more civil, but more effective in terms of public policy and finding solutions. That's my opinion. So I think your comments were very good.
There's an old secret or saying in programming that is, quit while they're wanting more. And I've just been handed this about 5 minutes ago, so I'm going to take that, and I'm sorry that, but I think, okay, all right.
Okay, Sue, can I respond to that? Of course. I am not conscious in my own mind of any motivation whatsoever to put this gentleman down for his discomfort with the Republican Party. I am genuinely suggesting that if the Republican Party has become hostile to his interests or views, that he has two choices. One is to do what Barry Goldwater said back in 1964, or 60, when Nixon and Rockefeller made the settlement of Fifth Avenue, or whatever they called it. Goldwater said, let's grow up, conservatives. If we want to take this party back, and I think we can someday, we have to do the work. So I think that one of the choices that anyone has is to compete for power and influence within the party. One of the things that I have seen now, Maggie Tinsman is an exception, tremendous exception. A lot of moderate Republicans have lain down and allowed people to drive them out of the party. And I believe that they need to come back in and take Barry Goldwater's advice from the other point of view. That's my view. But if they feel that they can't do it, or if the environment is too hostile to them and they don't wish to become Democrats, then their answer is to start an independent movement. And I say that as a student of political science and not as a person, as a combatant in this case. I just wanted you to know that. Now, the other thing I would say about that is that none of this is new. The anti-slavery movement took over the Whig Party in the same way, by being single-minded and hostile to those who weren't. And they took some beatings, literal beatings for it from the Democrats. James Weaver and the Greenbackers in Iowa, the Anti-Saloon League and the Dries, and in the Democratic Party, the anti-war movement in the 60s and early 70s. So I'm just saying, this is nothing new, and what looks like an uncivil moment right now may just be an ongoing process of realignment, and in 10 years we'll look back on it and say, hey, so that's what that was about.
But I think our panelists for the next session have just come into the room, and so I would just say, I think these panelists here have been terrific, and thank you very much.